It's the Trans Rights Readathon. Yay! Trans Rights Readathon. And I'm going to share with you books I won't shut the fuck up about for the Trans Rights Readathon. I try to read diversely all year. That is the goal. So these are books that I'm not reading for the Trans Rights Readathon. These are books that I have already read that I would recommend. And my favorite thing to do these days is I have a reading group and we pick a topic and then we read nonfiction around that topic. And we've been doing transgender and non-binary. And when we're doing this, I like to just grab as many books as I can in fiction and in nonfiction and steep myself in it, because it's how I remember best, is if I keep seeing it over and over again, especially if I explain it to people. So the more I talk to you, the more I actually remember the things that I'm saying, as opposed to having a vague idea of the book or having a coherent conversation about these particular topics, especially when it comes to trans rights. So when we started reading None of the Above, which is a nonfiction, I was also reading Cactus Country, which is another memoir, and Reclaimed by Seth Haddon. And last year I read A Lady for a Duke, another fiction. So I'm going to cover these 4 for now. There are many more, but I wanted to give a little sampling if you too wanted to join me on this journey of immersing into this topic. So the 2 memoirs that I read, both are for non-binary, which is kind of what we were focusing on, was non-binary narratives. And there are 2 memoirs and they couldn't really be more different in style. So you have None of the Above by Travis Alabanza and you have Cactus Country by Zoe Bossier, I believe that's how you pronounce it. It sounds French and I want to pronounce it French, but that's probably not how it's actually pronounced. Anyways, both are memoirs. None of the Above is crafted around 7 phrases from Travis Alabanza's life that they then interrogate and unravel and unmask. And some of the comments are rude, transphobic, some are ignorant, and others are a celebration, but they still cause some confusion, or at least having to really chew through those words and think about what they mean and what they mean to Travis. Travis Alabanza is a mixed race, Black, non-binary person. And so they are often finding themselves in public spaces with facial hair, leg hair, while also wearing a dress, and the amount of violence that comes from just existing as a person wearing it with facial hair is frightening, but also not surprising. And that's a lot of what Alabanza is talking about in their book. It's about just the way in which trying to divest people of gender and to think outside of the box of gender really instigates this feeling of rage. And I think about it, it's in some ways and in many ways not, but that idea of if we pay off people's student loans, if we forgive those loans, and people who've already paid the loans are like, I had to pay the loans, you have to pay the loans too, versus being like, it would be great if no one had to go through that terrible thing that I went through. So I'm okay with having other people have their loans forgiven when I had to pay for mine. It's a similar but very different idea that if someone is angry or upset about someone else's gender expression, some of that anger and rage has to come from they themselves have stayed in the cage of gender and have conformed to gender and given their lives to gender and given everything they are, expectation, hopes, dreams, everything to gender. And when they see somebody being like, I'm not doing that, I'm not going to spend my life trying to conform to specific gender norms, the rage happens so hard. And it's extremely dangerous. And Alabanza really talks about those phrases, the ones that people use when they really just want to feel better about themselves, or they want to hear someone's stories of pain and overcoming that. And also the expectation that trans people have to know everything from basically birth, that they will be denied access to gender affirming care if they don't tell everyone, oh, I knew since I was 6 and this is a static position that I'm in. I've always known that I've wanted this. And you have to say that in order to get the gender affirming care, even though cis people do not have to say those things in order to get their gender affirming care. And so it's really challenging this idea that people are static, that things can't change, or that your understanding of yourself can't change through time. And I really enjoy that about this book, because that's how I feel about it. So many of us might come to the realization that we are queer or that we are trans or non-binary at any given time in their life. And that's okay. Everything changes. People change. We're like fully aware of that. And yet we don't allow that grace for people seeking gender affirming care. So that's a lot about what this book is about. It's very well written. They talk so well about their own experiences without making it trauma porn. And it feels very real. There are some things that they just don't have answers for, or that there is no easy answer for, but that it is going to take everybody, all of us, to intercede and give up gender for people who are non-binary and trans to ever get acceptance. That's the work that everyone has to do, not just people who are identify as non-binary. So I would absolutely recommend this book to anyone. It's easy to understand. It covers a lot of points, and it's a very human perspective, not this ideal perspective, but human perspective on what's happening. The other one, Cactus Country, is much more of a, hi Piper, my doggie is here. She's rolling in. Hi Piper, hi. She needs a little pat. She needs some encouragement. But this is more of a sort of lyrical narrative memoir. It is a retelling of their life and boyhood in Cactus Country in Arizona near Tucson, living at an RV park. So it's a really close third-person narrative, and they are telling you their experience of their non-binary existence and how that has changed and how society has made that something harder for them to show up as they are because of people's expectations and because of gender expectations. And it's really lyrical. When they were younger, they presented as a boy, and most children just took that for what it was, though of course some ask whether or not they are a boy or a girl, especially as they get older, it gets harder and harder. And it's really a look on masculinity, especially as they were growing up and through their boyhood, seeing the expectations that men put on themselves and that society puts on men, and how masculinity means only one kind of thing, and that leaves people who are non-binary out of masculinity, and the ways in which it fails people, the ways in which those gender expectations have failed all the men who have come before. And so it's a very different narrative as far as how the reading experience, it feels literary. You forget that this is their lived experience because it is such a literary novel and has really beautiful prose. And there's not like moments in some other memoirs that are talking about a specific topic where they zoom out and give you a bird's eye view from themselves now, as opposed to the perspective of them as that child in that moment. We don't really get that. So you do have this very immersive narrative until the end, when you get to get some of the introspection and looking back moments. But it doesn't interrupt the story, keeping the story really complete and talking about someone who is more femme presenting as a non-binary person and their experience of trying to fit in within queer communities that don't accept them, trying to be authentic in who they are, trying to join in friend groups and being denied that because of their gender and their gender expression. So this is another one I would definitely recommend, especially if you're looking for something that's more in the dream house kind of memoir, more of a narrative retelling. It's very good and absolutely worth it. Both of these have good narrators also. And then I have Reclaimed by Seth Haddon. I've talked about this in another video. These are fiction works that feature trans people, trans non-binary people. And this one is a fantasy that features a trans masculine person. And when you get into fantasy, it's hard to put these names around things, but it could be perceived as trans masculine or non-binary and masculine presenting. Who knows? They don't say it themselves. But it's a really great combination of fantasy and romance. The fantasy world is simple and well articulated. And while this is the third in the series, I would recommend starting this one first. It's the best in the series. They're all standalones in the same universe. You're not missing anything if you skip to the third one first. All the information is there for you. It's simple enough that it doesn't require a long exposition to get you in there. But very interesting fantasy, and it has enemies to lovers. It has a very slow burn. I have never read a book with this level of slow burn. And I thought I wasn't going to get a sex scene. And I was like, this can't be happening to me. But you get it eventually. And you also have this dynamic, the enemies to lovers. And our main character, Saba, is a trans man who has been exiled from his country of origin. Everyone from that country during a very bloody colonizing war lost their lands and became transient, ended up in another country where they are second-class citizens. They can't really vote. They don't have representation. They're treated badly. And when a diplomat from the Rezwin Empire, which was the colonizing empire, is murdered, it is blamed on Saba, and enter Luan Zek, who is from the Rezwin Empire, fought in the war briefly that made Saba a refugee in another country. And so when Luan Zek shows up and Saba is in prison for this murder that he didn't commit, you get all that tension of enemies. Saba cannot stand Luan Zek, but Luan Zek is this huge giant of a man. Saba is this small little person. So you have the big small thing going on, which is pretty great. It's pretty great. And they have to end up working together in order to clear Saba's name, and Saba doesn't want anything to do with Luan Zek, while Luan is into Saba. And there's a lot of really great moments between them where they have these little fights and antagonize each other. And at the same time, we are seeing a huge amount of the story is about Saba and Saba trying to transform his body for it to be the way that he wants it to be, and is willing to die to get to this astral plane where people do not live. It kills people immediately, but there's just all this magic on the astral plane, and he wants it to transform his body. He's so desperate to have, and just his journey on how difficult it's been, and the emotional journey of being transmasculine and hiding parts of himself. So you get this wonderful romance, just so good, so tasty, enemies to lovers. One of the best sex scenes I have ever read in my life. Loved that. But while still getting the emotional journey of what it must feel like for someone in our world to have to deal with that identity crisis, and how to, it's a combination of loving who you are while also taking the time and energy to understand yourself and your needs. So it's not just like, you're just made up, just love your body however it is, stop trying to change it. It's not like that, but there is a part of him having to come to terms with himself. It's just so good. And then I have my other book, in A Lady for a Duke by Alexis Hall. You have a trans femme character. Her name is Viola Carroll. And during the Battle of Waterloo that she went to with her best friend, she saw the opportunity to be presumed dead in battle and come back as the woman they've always known themselves to be. So Viola is presumed dead, and a year or so later ends up at her brother's house and is a paid companion for his sister. And Viola gives up everything. Viola was supposed to inherit the family fortune, the homes, all of it, and she gave all of that up in order to live her true life. And what she didn't count on was that her best friend growing up, the Duke of Gracewood, that they were inseparable, the best of friends. She didn't anticipate him just spiraling into darkness after the death of his best friend, and he still looks for them everywhere. And it is a great representation too of a person with a disability. He was wounded during Waterloo and it messed up his leg, and so he's dealing with all of these things. And when Viola finally sees the Duke of Gracewood again in order to help his sister, she realizes just how messed up he is over all of this. He's addicted to laudanum. He's an alcoholic. He can't handle his affairs at all because he's grieving. And Viola is confronted with this grief, and the Duke of Gracewood does not recognize her. And so she's having to see how difficult it is for him, how her death changed him, and at the same time she is not willing to give that back because she needs this to be her true self. So there's this tension, and as they spend time together, something else blossoms, and there's just this attraction and love for each other. And then drama happens after that, but it's great. I was worried we were going to get like public outing of her being trans femme and all the sort of normal things that people pull for pretty much easy trauma porn. You don't get that. You don't get the sort of low-hanging fruit that never happens. So it's really just about these interpersonal relationships between these people. And it's really funny. The dialogue is very funny. I think Alexis Hall is very good at making witty dialogue between these characters. They're so believable. Every character is wonderful in this book. If you're looking for a historical period romance featuring a trans femme person, or just a historical period romance, this is a fantastic one to pick up. So these are my recommendations right now. I've read more. I just wanted to, these are the ones that I keep telling people about because of the books I won't shut the fuck up about.